We have fungal diseases, and there's only six of them, so we're going to take them three at a time. So you ought to be able to get through both of these tomorrow. All right, our first one. Now, of course, they're alive, so they have scientific names, and we haven't got into the um, actual notes on fungus yet. But one of the things that fungus do is that they release enzymes to the outside of their body, break their food down, and then absorb it back. So fungus does have that extracellular digestion where they're digesting food. And this is what happens when we have these fungal diseases. Fungal diseases are very, very hard to get rid of. And again, it's because we have something living that we're trying to eradicate when it's actually being a parasite with a parasitic relationship with us. So we don't take antibiotics for this. You can't take an antiviral. You would take an antifungal. And there are many antifungal. Most of them are creams. Some of them are um, in pill form. But if you do have to take an internal for a fungal infection, you do have to watch your liver numbers because very often all of these medications are processed through the liver and they can do a lot of damage. All right, let's start with the first disease. It's called candidiasis, and this is Candida albicans. Now, Candida is yeast, and there are a lot of different kind of yeast infections. Personal contact is transmission with Candida albicans, and some of the symptoms can be itching or burning. Now, with this particular Candida, this is a um, a type of yeast infection that overgrows in our gut. We have yeast in our gut, and it is in check because we have good bacteria that always keeps its levels okay, and it never overgrows. But if we take antibiotics, a lot of times, what happens is the good bacteria die, and then the yeast can start overgrowing. Now, in females, if Candida gets to be at large numbers, it causes vaginal itching and burning. But this is not the way it is in men. In men, it tends to overgrow and it can cause a lot of one of the symptoms usually is like a white covering in the mouth. Um, it can actually perforate the gut and get into your system, which is pretty dangerous. It can do this in females as well. But a lot of times, when females have something that they have to take an antibiotic for, the doctor will say, if you get a vaginal yeast infection, we need to treat it because it's common when we take a lot of antibiotics a lot, it kills that good bacteria. In men, it's going to manifest itself a little bit different. However, it can be, if females have a yeast infection, it can be sexually transmitted to males. So, on its own, it can be sort of a form of an STD. We typically don't include it with STDs because it's one of those infections that we get from an overuse of antibiotics. However, if females have it and they have sexual contact with their partner, then their partner can get it as well. Separate from that, though, men can get it on its own. A lot of times they will separate this out and they'll call it Candida vaginalis if they're specifically talking about the type of yeast infections that female gets. We're just going to lump it in Candida albicans to make it simpler, but there are volumes of books called Killing Candida. Candida yeast is hard to kill, and it would take several rounds of an antifungal medication in order to get rid of it. Okay, our next one is called histoplasmosis, and this is Histoplasma capsulatum, and it comes from bird droppings. Now, what happens with the bird droppings is blackbirds are the carriers a lot of times for histoplasmosis, and this is a lung infection. So what happens is the birds carry it in their feces, and then they will use the bathroom, and if they're in your yard and they use the bathroom and you're out in the yard playing, if kids are out there, they can actually inhale the spores because fungus do reproduce by spores, and so they can inhale the spores. It gets in their lungs and they can get flu-like symptoms. Anytime you have bird feeders in your backyard, or if you see a collection of blackbirds in your backyard, you want to kind of shoo them away, get them away. It's very common around bird feeders because as they're feeding, they can use the bathroom, and then it's something that we will inhale. This is not zoonotic, so if your dogs are outside and they pick it up, um, it's not going to be something that they can transmit to you. But a lot of times when we encounter dead blackbirds, especially, the health department is supposed to be called because histoplasmosis is really a very, very intense, bad disease. You can see the spores actually growing inside of lungs, and people are very, very sick. Severe cases can end up in death. So, with blackbirds, and you typically see blackbirds congregate a lot. And if that happens, you need to shoo them away or make some noise and get rid of them because if they use the bathroom, they could be possibly carrying this fungal infection. So very often, health department will come out and get the birds and test them, and then they will notify that particular zip code that, hey, there's been a case of histoplasmosis, and just alert the public. The symptoms are going to be flu-like. You're going to have a hard time breathing. It's going to cause a lung infection. You get fever, feel real lethargic, hard to get out of bed. But there's a very intense cough. The cough does have a lot of fluid and phlegm with it. It's not a dry cough because you do actually have spores growing in the lung. Okay, the last one for this little recording is ringworm. And ringworm, it typically is thought of by a lot of people as worm, and it's not a worm. It is a fungus, and it's Tinea corporis, and this comes from personal contact, and you get a rash. Many of you may have had this. It's very typical to have this in a setting like a kindergarten where they lay down on mats or wrestling, something like that, where you have mats, this fungus or the spores get onto the mat, and then kids can pick it up through personal contact. Typically, you'll see it on the arm or leg, and it looks circular like it's a little worm, so people do think it is a worm, but trust me, it's not a worm. Creams, a lot of these fungal infections can be cleared up by the use of creams, and it's hard, and we'll talk about why when we get into the notes, but it is hard to get rid of ringworm, and you have to have many applications. Even after the rash has gone away, you need to keep applying the cream because a lot of the body of the fungus is laying beneath the skin, and it can be recurring. So you've got to watch that.